Okay, thanks everybody for coming. We are here for another one of our webinar series. We've got a lot of people joining and jumping in as we get together. I appreciate everybody coming. We got a new guest host today that we'll get to in just a moment. This one here is going to be is finding trends in your driving, with a little bit of a different focus, which is going to be kind of interesting and fun to chat about, where you have your own data and maybe you're tracked by yourself, don't have teammates, don't have some data to share with. It's going to be kind of fun to look at different ways of looking at your data and finding some speed. So let's start off as we always do with some quick introductions of the folks that are going to be out there helping us in the question and answer boxes and looking at your chats and throwing up some links. But before we do that, make sure that you as we go through this, that if you have a question that's pertinent to this finding trends in your driving topic, make sure that you plug them into the question and answer box. Click on that button up in your bar, open up your question and answer box, and plug them in there. Both James and I will be bumping along and kind of viewing those and trying to answer them on the fly. And if some of those that we get to the end and we haven't answered yet, we'll take a dedicated portion right at the end of the presentation and answer some of those as well. So make sure you plug those in there. If the guys, if it's something else or the guys can answer really quickly, we've got a bunch of folks that are in the background answering these by typing in answers for those. You'll see those answers come up, and then we'll answer the ones that are really pertinent to where we're at, if we can, during the live presentation. And then in a few days, sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but then we will compile all those questions. If you see something come and go and you didn't see an answer for it, we're compiling all of those questions and answers and putting them into a document and then attaching it in the description box of the YouTube video where this presentation will be stored. So you can always go back and find the information for that as well. Okay, and one more thing that we will talk about is the email that came out to you this morning, 1 hour before this webinar started. There's a whole bunch of links at the bottom, all the previous recorded webinars, but we added something early on at about midway down that email. Is the materials for this particular webinar are linked there. If you want, I would probably wait until after, at least for the data and the user profiles, but the data that James is going to use today is linked on there. You can download that, and the user profiles to have your screen look similar to what James is going to use today. And then also the data itself plus the presentation. All 3 different files are there for you to download and take a look at. Might just want to sit back, watch, and enjoy the discussion, learn a few things that way, and then grab those files later. But hopefully every email that you get from us 1 hour before the next webinars will have some supporting documents linked in that mail. So make sure you look for those as you get more of these emails reminding you that the webinars are coming. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about some quick introductions of who's going to be helping us for this webinar. First, we've got Robbie. Tell us a little bit about you and what you're going to be doing today.
Hey guys, I'm going to be answering all your questions. Today is I'm a keyboard cowboy, as I like to call it. So get them up there. We'll get them answered, and if not, we'll go back through and answer them more thoroughly and post them to the YouTube videos, so we can get that started.
Perfect. Robbie's been a big help with me getting a lot of this webinar stuff up and running, and I appreciate that, and thank you very much, Robbie. Cameron is going to help us out as well today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Cameron.
Hey everybody, Cameron over here in the East Coast office. I will also be answering all your questions today, or the ones that I can get to before Robbie does. And we will be, if you have any questions, come up in the question and answer, and we'll get them answered for you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Very, very much. So grab those documents if at the end of the session if you want, and then if you have any questions, make sure you give me a holler or take a look. So perfect. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm gonna click ahead one slide here. Our co-host today, it's the first time we've had James. He's going to do a few with us. He's got some really good ideas. I first met James, before James introduces himself, I first met James, gosh, it had to be 10, 12, 15 years ago or something. I do not know for sure, but James was living in the area that I am here in the greater Seattle area, and was racing cars and was really a data data junkie even back then, and I put on a lot of different seminars and about AIM data acquisition, and James came to a few of them, and we got to chatting and got to I enjoyed watching him learn the whole process of data, and of course you know, the whole racing side of it as well, and some questions that he would have back and forth. Love to help people that love to help themselves, and James was certainly one of those. So that's how I met James many years ago. So I've enjoyed watching him, and we've got lots of mutual friends on top of that. So James, tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get started.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is James Colborn. Some of you may recognize my voice from some of the videos that I prepared on YouTube. So this is what I look like. Good job. This will be the only video where you know that. Now hopefully you won't have to see my face ever again. But I've been in a position where through my club racing, I did a little bit of pro racing, but mostly club racing, and always for fun. I figured out very quickly that data is something that I can relate to be able to find ways of being able to improve. And so very much a sponge. I notice as the participants, there's people who are coming in who I have learned an absolute ton from, as well as Roger. And just got to the point where it's now part of a habit. It's a routine for me to look at data as I'm at the track to be able to develop. For 15 years, I lived in the United States, and you can see on the left-hand side, I was a predominantly BMW driver. And then since I've moved back to the UK the last couple of years, I decided to start racing Formula Ford because of the competitive nature. It's a ridiculously difficult series to do well in, and the amount of development that I can get from that series is huge. So that's where I am right now, and I'm just very happy to be here. So thanks for having me on, Roger.
Very much. You're coming to us outside of London, right? Somewhere outside of London?
Yeah, just outside of London.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
We are very global in our webinars lately, right? So perfect. The next thing I'd like to do is bring up a poll. Those of you that come to our webinars, we do these polls, and it's very, very helpful to us as understanding where we want to go. You're going to see we actually have changed up. The first poll will be one that you've seen before, but the next three are different, and we're trying to dig in a little bit deeper into some of the information that you guys are giving us, that's helping us understand where we're going with these webinars. So this first one though is a poll of what AIM devices do you own. You can select multiples here and give us an idea of what's out there. It really does help us understanding what is out there, what we're working with, and then to try to build our information around, so our webinars around. If we've added SmartyCam to the other one like we did in the previous webinar. If it truly is other, love for you to, in the chat box, other, and then do a dash, and then what is your other piece of equipment that we missed in the poll, just like we did last time. That will help maybe us fine tune these AIM devices. We're approaching about a minute. Looks like our numbers are about where they normally are. I'll give you just a few more seconds as I switch channels, as I switch what we're sharing here, and moving into the slides that we'll be chatting about here as we get going. So let me end that polling, and then end that polling and get that out of the way, and that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the control of the mouse over to James. James has got just a couple of slides, and then we're going to jump into live data for the most part. James is going to give us an idea of just some basics of the way that he looks at data when he gets done looking for those trends, and then we'll jump into live data, and we'll really have him show us what he does. So James has the mouse now. James, go ahead and take over, and we'll listen and learn a little bit about finding trends in your driving.
Brilliant, thank you. And yes, I have control, which is lovely. Of course, when someone said you've got control, you're like, fantastic.
Finally, no.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So one of the things that I think is really important as we look at data is the first and foremost is to be able to get some kind of methodology in your head that allows you to be able to always go back to a quick analysis every time you look at data. It doesn't always have to be in the measures graph. Some people, one of the folks, Mike asked me earlier before we joined, do you look at video? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely video. I sometimes look at, instead of looking at graphs in between sessions. But if I'm looking at data and I'm looking at the measures graph, the first thing I want to be able to do is to break it down into 3 components. Now, you may be feeling that this is, I've heard this before, and you probably have because Roger taught me this, but it's important to be able to, work through this type of scenario. So the first thing, and the most important in my view, you heard from a good friend of mine, James Colborn, a few weeks ago on looking at time distance, is that the first thing you need to be able to understand is that we're racers. We want to be able to go quicker. It's the quicker we go, the better we do, the better we do, the better we do in qualifying, and the better we do in qualifying, hopefully, the better we do in the race. And so if we're looking at lap analysis, the first thing I need to be able to see is where am I faster or slower? Now, I chose this example first and foremost because this, and we'll go into the data, is a very interesting chart that basically the first thing on this slide is that section number 1 tells me that I'm slower everywhere because that line is pretty much linear throughout the entire lap, but I'll explain why that is as we go forward. So I'm identifying first and foremost that one lap is consistently slower through a lap than the other. The second thing is I want to be able to understand whereabouts on track and what are the details as to why that's happening. So I go to the second part, which is the speed trace. If you're quicker or slower, chances are there's a speed variation as to why that's happening. Am I faster or slower at a certain point on the track? And so section number 2 is my immediate next step. I'm like, okay, let's have a look there and see if we can see it. And I'm sure many of you are looking at this already going, oh my goodness, there's work to be done, because this is my data. And so I can be as critical as I like to be about it, because the only person who's going to get upset is me. So no need to worry about that. And then the third thing is I want to be able to understand why. And so I've used, and I'm going to show you a different example with the same thought process and rationale, but if you've got a solo or a solo DL, solo or a solo 2, not even a DL, but you're looking at absolute, just GPS-based data, the next place I like to go to is GPS longitudinal acceleration for the very simple reason that down is braking and up is accelerating. And so, in many respects, it gives you a much clearer view as to, certain aspects of driver input. And so I use this framework in every measures graph I look at. And the one thing I want to be able to caveat as we go through this is my focus is on driver development and, looking at your own driving and your trends. We can get into over time, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of seminars and have been done, which is it the driver making the car do something? Is the car making the driver do something? That's to be able to get to, that's step 2. The first and foremost is to be able to understand what's going on track. So that's the basic first premise. But if I click on the mouse, many of you are going to go, well, hold on, I've got extra channels, and who doesn't love a little bit of extra channel? But in this instance, exactly the same data, exactly the same view. But what I've got here is the first thing is same time distance is the same. I move up to section number 2. Why is that? Whereabouts, what's happening on the track in terms of speed, and that's happening. But then the third section is then, what's the driver doing? And here I've put in, instead of having GPS longitudinal, if you're lucky enough to be able to have brake pedal, or if you're lucky enough to be able to have brake pressure, now all of a sudden you've got even more, inputs and telling information as to what's happening on track. And so, this is for me, this is my view. Now, the reason I use this is because I need a framework where I can work quickly. I wouldn't necessarily say it is a discipline, but it really is, and it was taught to me by racing with people like James Colborn, who you've met, and a number of people who are on this session have all said, which is finish your session, get out the car, look at data. Don't start bench racing, don't get distracted, work while it's still fresh in your head. And so, I get out the car, download the data, whether it's from Wi-Fi or plug-in or however you do it, work through analyzing some of the data points, and then when I've identified a few things that I need to work on, then and only then can I start having a more authoritative conversation if you're lucky enough to have somebody working on your car, or if you're working on it yourself, or just to build a plan of whatever your next session is going to be. So what's happening in terms of time, distance, where and what speed aspects are happening, and then what's the driver doing. And that framework is something that I stick to every time I'll be able to move forward.
Kind of a couple interesting things that you threw in there where you, in your box number 3 here, you've got the pedal position, the brake pressure. And yeah, you had some information before of the, what happened, where it happened, and why did it happen. But the by adding those additional ones, we just dig in to be able to get in deeper and deeper into the why, right? And yeah, peeling of the onion, as James mentioned earlier, which is always interesting as well. So
yeah, and I think that's really important, Roger. But what I will say here is that I think there are different times for different types of data analysis based on time that you're allowed to be able to have a look at. And be curious as we go forward. And I've had a number of interesting debates with people who have said, I just don't have time to look at data because I've got to change my tires, I've got to refuel my car, I've got to change all sorts of variables. So if you think about data having that opportunity of peeling the onion, this could be as straightforward as I'm going to peel the orange. There's one layer, and I'm straight in. And I just need to be able to see that now, to be able to get enough information to be able to continue working through, because the time management challenge is tricky. So this framework will help.
Yeah, perfect lead into a poll that we have there. One of our new polls that I'm going to launch right now. Your ability to look at that racing data. How often do you look at your race data? Everybody, go ahead and answer that. Don't click on all of them, but maybe your top 3 or whatever. It is a multiple choice, but how often do you look at your racing data? Do you do it at the track after every download? Do you never do it, right? So we've kind of got the entire run here of different times that you might be looking at your data. It is a multiple choice, but you can take a look at it and select the one that most fits you. If it's kind of in between, go ahead and select a couple of them. So, James, while that's going on, do you want to run into the live data next, or do you?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, while that poll's going on, and it's funny, everyone I've done these so far, I've wanted to see. So I'm curious as to what information comes up. The reason being is that a lot of the analysis we look at can be done at different times during the day. So this just happens to be a scenario where we're looking at the data. Now, the first thing I want to be able to have a look at is, let's go up here to the user profile.
Before we move on, everybody's going to be interested in. Let me end that poll and then let me share with everybody so they can actually see the results. Might be interesting for everybody. The two of them are virtually tied at the session, after each session, and then at home after the track. So they wait till they get home and have a little bit of time to download that data. Although end of the day is pretty good as well. I love the one with the 0 on it there at the bottom. I'm kind of like that one as well. So perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing those results and come over here, and our next poll is going to be in a few minutes, but I'll get everybody kind of thinking about it. How do you use your data, and how do you use your racing data, to improve your driver, your car, your vehicle health? That's going to be our next one. We're going to work that one in after James takes a look at a few and shows you a couple of kind of cool ways of doing what we're talking about. So go ahead, James.
Sure, thanks, Roger. And I was just going to show folks, in terms of, you've all seen, and I'm sure in the chat or the Q&A they can show the user profile conversation that's already happened. But what we did earlier was went in and created a couple of these. If I click on simple, that is what I just showed in terms of, here is your time distance, and now this is live data. Here is the speed trace up here, and then we also have sort of driver inputs. I've also added in, which I absolutely love to be able to have a look at, and these are my 2 very quick go-to type of screens that I look at, the GPS overview, because this is one of the tells, or one of the factors as to why you may have done something inside the car. For example, I may have had to have, I couldn't have accelerated where I need to. Well, that's because you early apexed the corner, and you can see that because the GPS map shows that your position on track. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail, but just to be able to sort of demonstrate the same rationale and the same thought process. But for today's purposes, I'm going to show driver input with the brake and the accelerator as well. The reason being is that I just think it gives some very interesting and very telling type of information that you can look at straight away, because this also helps with your inputs, and you're going to see as I look through this data, or we look through it together, that there are certain variables that you can see straight away without needing to spend extra time analyzing. And by the way, no issues with folks saying, oh, I math channels and everything. I love those, but those are ones that take me, from my sort of comprehension, time. And so those are ones that I'll probably do in the evening in a hotel room if I'm at a racetrack, or after the race weekend. I want something that I can get quickly and I can get going with very, very, very well. So we're here at, this is Oregon Raceway Park for any of the Pacific Northwest racers who've been here. A hugely fun track to drive, ton of elevation changes, and a lot to be able to work on, plus lots of corners, which you have to string together to get a great lap time. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing is to say I've got 2 sessions that are open here. You can see them here. I've also probably show you in the test database, but basically I've got a practice session and I've got a qualifying session. And if I were to go into the laps, you can see that the practice session has more laps and the lap times are all over the place. And the qualifying session has fewer laps, but they're relatively consistent. And for me, one of the things that I generally tend to do is it's going to sound dreadful to say, I kind of mess around in practice. And that's not what I mean, in that sort of context. I mean that I try different things. I try different lines. I try different braking points, and see what works, what doesn't. And so data is a very useful tell. Plus, I also see if there are other elements. One of the things I did in this particular session is I ran the practice on very, very old tires. And then the qualifying I ran on very, very new tires. And so one of the reasons I said earlier on, hold on a second, this is relatively linear in terms of a progression here. This happens to stem from the fact that there was grip and no grip in 2 different sessions, and straight away you can see a variance. But I wanted to be able to look at, the first thing is a 1 lap analysis, because 1 lap is, 1 lap is useful if you want to compare. And then we're going to talk about the virtues of a 1 lap, which we'll do. And then we're going to talk about why 1 lap doesn't always help you. And I think it's obvious, but we'll chat about that in a minute. So looking at this data straight away, there's a few things that I'm looking at, first and foremost, going, ooh, that's pretty ugly. We'll talk about this section in a little bit. That's decidedly ugly in terms of inputs there. But the first thing I want to zoom in on is something here. So the first thing I'm looking at, to be honest, I look at these so many times, and I've probably looked at this example, that on the time distance here in this section, where it goes from about 1,000 feet, meters or feet? I think it's feet.
In this case, yep.
Thank you. See, I'm back in the UK now. I'm getting stuck with the imperial and the metric. It's all just doing my head in. But we can see that all of a sudden, the time is lost here. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's have a look up here. And well, sure enough, look at that. There is a distinct difference. If I click in the data, we could just look at the speed difference here at this point on track. It's hidden behind these folks here. Let me just minimize that. We're talking 5 miles an hour. Okay, there's a notable difference there. And then we're going to have a look at the data down here. And so, well, first and foremost, not only did I kind of overbrake here, but I also didn't use the throttle particularly well. So I want to zoom in a little bit and have a look at that, just so I can show you what I'm thinking about. So I've hit the little plus button up here on the right-hand side. And if I go too fast, just yell in the chat, slow down, Crazy Brit, and I'll do that. But basically, I'm going to highlight that section there. And, oops, just get exactly where I want it. And we're able to have a look at zooming in. Now, you can see the GPS map has zoomed in a little bit. Not a huge amount on there that I want to have a look at in this example, but we can look at that later on. But let's have a look at this speed difference that's here. Here's the time distance. Oh my goodness, look, 2/3 of a second by the time I get to here. And that's night and day in the spec class. Then we're looking at things like brake pressures. Now, if they don't show up well, you can just double click here and it'll resize. It should resize. There we go. That's a little bit better in terms of used a little bit more pressure, because the scale's slightly odd, but I'm not worried about that then necessarily. What I want to be able to have a look at is I want to be able to have a look at the throttle here. And so interestingly, straightforward analysis here is that, while, not only do we find ourselves getting on the throttle smoothly here. The red doesn't do too badly there, but at the same time, there's a monumental lift at this point. And with that lift that you can see in the data, all of a sudden, the speed just disappears. The revs drop, and you can start getting an idea of the fact that, driver inputs are causing certain things to happen. And so, we, can start looking at trends in our own data and being able to say, what was the cause of this? Now, I could go into a lot more detail as to, let's get into, position on track. We can look at the corner preceding to that. Did I do anything? And I'm going to look at that a bit later on. But for the purposes of this first sort of assessment here, what we're looking at is we're looking at the fact that very straightforward variables will give you an indication as to what you're doing as a driver. So my initial thought on this would be, if the red lap allows me to go to full throttle there, then that means it's possible. And so just keep doing that. Or as I said to Roger, as we were talking last night, if I'm telling myself, I'm like, just don't do that, which we all know is so easy to do when we're in a race car. Just don't do that. It's like, if only I could. So in many respects, that's the first thing. And as we go through this lap, we can see all sorts of different variables that are here. The reason I wanted to be able to sort of start looking at this is that it's a very, very good and nice example of being able to demonstrate to you that something's happened and you've gone slower. You can see why, because there's a speed drop. So why is the speed drop? Oh, well, that's pretty straightforward. It's because you've let off the gas. Now, we're race drivers, and none of us would ever say anything like, I have no idea why that happened. I was flat there. It must be something going on there. Of course I was flat there. And so data helps you be able to work through what those variables look like as you move forward. And we can pick on certain different parts throughout the track to be able to have a look at this. But I'm not going to, because I want to be able to start. In fact, I'm sure you're all seeing other ones, but if I did do another one to be able to have a look at here, if I hover over the cursor, you can see where I'm sort of coming up to this very interesting corner here, and I'm going to study this. It's been too long since I've driven an ORP, so I can't remember the track corner number. So if anyone can remember, just feel free to comment. But interestingly, the same problem happens again. We're in a situation whereby, again, that time distance is lost again, because effectively you're flat from here, up a hill, very barely a little lift here and coming out of it. And so again, a straightaway. And what are we seeing that's happened here? Well, on the red lap, oh, that's a beautiful transition, but hold on a second, what happened with the blue lap? Yeah, lifted again, even though I would have swear to myself that I was absolutely flat. And so we can start looking at different aspects of why that is. But you can see, and I wanted to be able to demonstrate this first and foremost, that you can see it. Now, you may be thinking, well, hold on a second, pretty straightforward. And I'm like, well, I'm glad, because we're building up to something, and it should get better as we go forward. So that's the first thing. Now, before we go to the next thing that I wanted to be able to have a look at, which gets into a lot more of the, what's the driver doing, and is there a linking effect or a chain effect? And let me explain that as we go forward. But basically, the reason I may have lifted is because I did something stupid beforehand, like carried too much speed into a corner, or the car was in the wrong place, or whatever need be. But I wanted to be able to talk about one thing that I see people do all the time with their own data, with analyzing against other drivers' data, is that what they generally tend to do is they want to analyze just their fastest lap. Now, if it's your fastest lap, that's the lap I should be analyzing, right? Well, yes and no. Because one of the things that you often find is that you are doing things differently in different parts of the track, consistently and inconsistently, and the fact that that one lap may have some significant other variables that are on there, which could be other cars on track. And so one of the videos that we have, what we produced, which may be useful for folks to be able to look, is if anyone on here happens to have competed in, let's say, for example, a chump car, or an now called champ car race, or a lucky dog race, or a lemons race, where there may be, or any kind of race. I remember when I used to watch, friends of mine, I know one of them's on here, Seth Thomas, I'd go and support the team, and they'd be in a Continental Tire Series. 85 cars would be on track. It's busy, and you're being passed, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Of course, there's going to be traffic all over the place. How do you get to know what your one lap versus one lap comparison is? And so it's great to be able to see certain trends. but unless you're absolutely on your own in each of the sessions, which could be the case, it's not always going to tell you the information you need. Plus, there may be other things that you can learn more from by saying, in this sector on this lap I did well, and in this sector I did well here. And if I combine them all together, I could do even better. And that's where, if we were to go into the split times report, which we could show maybe later on, we could break the track down and be able to say, if I piece together all of my best sectors, my best lap could actually be a lot faster. So make sure we look at that. So that's the first thing that I wanted to be able to look at. Now, this is called analyzing trends. Now, a trend would suggest that there's more than one thing that you're going to happen. One of the biggest trends I like to look at is consistency. And so what I want to be able to do is to be able to start looking at performances across the board. Now, to be able to do that, I want to be able to see where I'm doing something well and where I'm not doing something well all the time, because that's the area where I can fix it. Because, you know, any of you, and I'm sure this happened to me, still happens to me today, especially in those Foreman Fords, which are all brand new to me, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I forgot to brake, and yet it still went around the corner. Brilliant, because I have no idea. You know, I'm still learning grip parameters and dynamics and all those sort of things.
Before you move on to that, James, let's because I know where you're going to go with that, and it's going to be very interesting. Let me bring up one more poll that that helps us understand a little bit more about how do you use your. Let me, if I can get that to click. There we go. How do you use your racing data? And again, it's multiple choice. So if you want to click on a couple of those, that would be fine. The how do you use it to improve your driving? Is it mainly your tasks that you use this hardware and this software for, to improve your driver performance, vehicle performance, BOP requirements, you know, just for lap times and predictive lap timing in the car? It might be interesting. And why everybody's looking at that, James did something as that kind of runs through. If once you answer, if you hit the submit, it'll get out of the way. Somebody asked the question before we move on, and you zoomed in, and it talked about that the GPS map only showed that area. James mentioned that, and the reason that does that, why we're finishing up this poll, is a thing that we call measures graph as boss. And when you zoom in on a certain area on the measures graph, it is zooming in and only showing you that area on the GPS map. So we could still then zoom in on the GPS map and look at the driven line differences that the driver did at that point. But you'll notice that every time we zoom in on the measures graph, you'll notice that the GPS map only shows the segment that is visible in the measures graph. So kind of an interesting way that the software works. It's also dynamically linked that it actually is zooming in on both. So that's why. And then in order to zoom in on either one of them, as Michael just asked in the question, make this the active window. I've just clicked my mouse in there one time, and if I zoom there, either with my cursor keys or my scroll wheel on my mouse or the controls that James used, it zooms in on the measures graph. If I want to zoom in on just the GPS map, come over there, click that box once, and now you're zooming. The zoom tools that you use will zoom in on the GPS map itself and see the difference in line, and then you can click in there, and the cursor jumps to that spot in the measures graph as well. So just a little bit of background information on how that kind of worked. Thank you everybody for taking the poll. I'm going to end that polling and give you guys an idea of what that looks like. Let me share the results, and then James is going to go ahead and jump back in just a second. But as you can see, the overwhelming thing that people are wanting to look at, which is exactly on target on what James is talking about here today, is to improve the driver, to improve driver performance. The vehicle performance is there as well, obviously, and comparing data against teammates or other drivers, which is I believe is where James is actually going to go next, which is kind of a little bit still looking at his own data, but comparing multiple laps. So that'll be kind of fun. And then a good number of people, mostly lap times for predictive lap time in the race car. So perfect. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing those results and hand this back over in just a second to James. Let me. The next one we're going to actually chat about is your most popular Race Studio analysis functions. You know, which ones are you using the most? So with that, James, go ahead and jump in there and head to your next step.
Absolutely, will do. So I did want to be able to caveat before we go to the next one is that I'm sure everyone's comfortable with certain aspects of input. But if you're lucky enough to have something like a brake pressure analysis. I wanted to be able to have a look at just reading it quickly because it'll help us with our charts going forward. And I was just thinking about as we're chatting. The throttle is pretty straightforward. If you apply 100%, the line goes up, and that's 100% throttle until you come out of the throttle, and you can see this happening with the mouse. Then we get to this little bit here. This is where we'll start looking at more analysis over time. But if the throttle is doing this, chances are you're not confident on the throttle in that particular corner, and you can't go to full throttle. And so as a result, you're managing the car, and you're trying to make sure that you can manage the throttle as you go through that corner. And so bouncing up and down usually indicates that there's something awry or something amiss in that corner that's preventing you from being able to go to full throttle. Throttle is actually a pretty interesting one to be able to have a look at because it allows us to be able to say, oh, you came out of throttle. That's pretty, you know, and there. And in fact, why I chose my data, I have no idea. But anyway, what I wanted to have a look at is brake, because brake sometimes is one where we need to be able to think about, and this is a great example. What if I can zoom in here? I just want to be able to quickly look at this, because this gives you if this shows up nicely, this gives you an idea of a brake trace which shouldn't happen. Because when we're at race school, what we generally tend to be taught is threshold braking. So you start at 10, you slow the car down, and then as you ease off the brake pedal, it's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Versus what you're taught not to do is to go the other way, which is I start applying the brake, and then I apply the brake a bit more, and then I apply a bit more, and it goes the opposite direction. And so all of a sudden, as you're trying to release the brake to come into the corner to trail into that brake, what you're actually getting here is brilliant. I can see what people's comments are in the box as this is happening, which I think is hilarious because that absolutely is a sphincter sensor. But in many instances, this is the opposite, which is like, oh my God, I haven't broken early enough or whatever. And all of a sudden, it's like adding more brake, and the balance of the platform is all over the place. If the balance of the platform is all over the place, it means that it takes longer for the platform to then settle, and obviously your heart rate to then be able to get the car to the point where you can turn and apply throttle. And so looking at brake traces is interesting. You want to see one that goes up and then comes down this direction rather than seeing one that goes the other way, because the other way is the opposite to threshold braking, which I don't know what you'd call, but you'd call that unthreshold braking or something like that. So I wanted to show you that, because that is when we start looking for trends in your data, you know, really important to be able to analyze. So let's do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first turn off the practice session. No, sorry, that's gone. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at some laps. So we've gone past the point where, you know, we now know that new tires are better than old tires. Which may be indicative of why I may not have been. Of course, it was the tires, nothing to do with the driving, always the tires. The tires weren't right, so I couldn't go to throttle, and that's why I was smart. Nothing to do with driving at all. But in many respects, what we've got now is we've got new tires and we've got a qualifying session. And in this session, lap times are far closer in terms of consistency. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are in 53. Yeah, I'm just adding more there, there's 4 actually. So what I'm going to do is I want to be able to see how good I am at rinse and repeat. Now, the reason I want to be able to do this is that, as we know, once you're in a race, consistency is key. You don't want to be faster in 1 lap and then terrible in 7 laps, especially if you've managed to get your way into a position of not necessarily authority, but get into a position of being able to say, I'm actually doing really well, or I want to catch somebody, or I think they're slower than I am, or I've managed to, heaven forbid, get in the lead and I don't want to lose it because I'm inconsistent. So what we want to have a look at here is we want to have a look at some laps. So I'm going to select all of the laps in fact, like an idiot, I selected 55. I'm going to select 4 laps. And I want to be able to start looking at some consistency in terms of where I'm doing well and where I'm not. Now, right now, this looks like we're at the disco. God, you sound like I'm 100 years old. This is nice and multicolored that is here. So what we want to be able to have a look at is we want to change this up a little bit so that it's easier to be able to see the fastest lap that we have and how the other laps did against it. So the one thing I like to do is I like to select the laps that I want to see about consistency. And then I go back to the measures area here. And because we're on per lap color, I can color the laps to whatever I want. So the fastest one we're going to leave in sort of like this red color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the other ones. I like to use gray. So I'm going to click on gray here. And some may have seen a video of me doing this. This is the only bit, so you have to talk through to do this, which is like.
This is an interesting thing why James is doing that. Always an interesting way of looking at how people make this easier to understand. And this is one of the things that James has came up with that I found that was just super intriguing.
So I've changed all those laps now. So we've got those that are there. But the problem that we have right now is that the reference lap, which is red, is at the back. So this is a little hack that you can do just to make sure the lap shows up the fastest, is you go back into the laps and you go up here and you turn off your fastest lap and you turn it back on again. And I learned how to do that after working at Microsoft for many years, that the turning it off, turning it on again is without doubt the best way to be able to solve any problem that you have. And I don't know, everyone would kill me one day for saying that. But in general, now all of a sudden, we're seeing certain variables that are on track. And we can start looking at things like, you know, how am I doing in relation to the laps that are all relatively close in time? Anything that's in the 53s is within a second of each other. And so in many respects, now we're in a scenario where we can start seeing certain pieces of information. Now we've got a little bit of, you know, color. It looks a bit weird here, but that's okay. But what I wanted to be, and I don't know where that green's coming from, but it's just the color contrast on the screen. But there are things on here, and again, parrot fashion, I learned this from Roger, in that, I wish it would fix the tires, was things like where are the lines close and where are they far apart? If the lines are close together, just as they are here, especially in the sort of slow in the corners, there's some consistency there. That means that you're braking exactly the same spot. You've got the same, if you look at the slope of the braking, for example, you can see that the brake pressures are roughly the same, which interestingly enough, we can see with the brake trail that are here, trace that is here. You're like, oh, that's great. But then we get into the areas which are, well, hold on a second, when they're far apart, Roger suggested, I've always used this term, that's noisy. The noise is where there's opportunities to be able to find greater levels of consistency in your driving. So this is what I often like to think about in terms of looking at trends in your driving. I don't need to look at anyone else's data right now. I need to be able to look at where I am not doing things as well as I could be, and then looking at why that happens to be the case and what we can do differently. Because then I can start saying, okay, am I consistent? So the first thing I wanted to be able to have a look at is I want to go back to the same spot we looked at earlier on. There's a little bit of noise that is here. So let's do this. The first thing I want to do is to have a little zoom in here. I'm going to grab the mouse and have a little zoom that is here. Let's probably grab it to about, I should have practiced this, you know.
A little harder when he's running remotely.
Yeah,
it's not exactly the same speed.
It's not, you know, it's nice from that point of view. So here we go. So again, red lap fastest and gray laps, wow, fastest, you know, not too bad here. Slower, a little bit faster than slower, you know, all sorts of stuff that's going on. So I want to look at why that is in terms of what's going on. And so, you know, we can see all sorts of interesting variables that are here. So the first thing I want to be able to have a look at is, well, what was the fastest lap doing? Well, it was, you know, it was fastest, which is marvelous. And to the tune of, you can see the different variables in terms of speed as we're approaching that corner, some 98, nearly 99, some down in the 95. So there's an inconsistency there. So, okay, so let's have a look at why that is. So then we're going to go down here and say, okay, great. Let's have a look at the inputs that are happening there. Well, hold on a second. You're braking here is just got a tad braver here, it looks like, in terms of what's going on. But I want to talk about this a little bit more in terms of that link effect that's going on. So effectively here on the gray lines, which are slightly slower laps, I have stopped and I've broken the car too soon. And so, you know, relatively inconsistent in that sort of delivery. The red lap here is applying the brakes at the latest, yet at the same time is the fastest through there. So God knows what I was doing there. Maybe I'd had my breakfast cereals and that was the first lap I did. And we can look at which lap. In fact, you can see up here it is the second one that's after the lap. And then I start to overdrive, which is basically the way I would describe it. But as we look at this, we're like, okay, well, great. So hold on a second. So braking coming off the throttle here, braking later. Well, hold on a second. Surely that means that, you know, I will be able to, you know, slow car, we'll go back to the throttle sooner. But hold on a second, the grey laps here, I'm not really going to throttle particularly consistent here. In fact, this one, oh my goodness, look at this. That jaggedy pedal position coming out of it, whereas the red line coming out of the corner, even though it's slowest at the point of apex, as we zoom in here, you can see the little one goes down here, and I'm going to zoom in a minute just to have a look at positioning as well, is that while the red lap is the slowest here, look at the, absolutely, Seth has absolutely nailed it. And if I've ever been coached by Seth, I encourage you to do so, because he's amazing and would always talk to me about this all the time, is slow in, fast out. So all of a sudden, I've tried desperately hard to be able to pick up the throttle, can't do it, I'm all over the place. Whereas here, I've slowed the car more, I've held the brake longer, slowed the car down, and because the car's slower, even though I'm trying to go to the throttle here and I can't, I've applied the throttle here and I'm clean coming out of that corner. So again, it's a nice way of being able to say, okay, how about you clean that corner up a little bit, because that's going to start costing you a lot as you think about your lap time. And that's just one corner. But I want to go over here to the GPS map, and I just want to zoom in a little bit. Let me just move this up here and see if there's any difference in terms of the corner itself. And that's, I wouldn't say terribly, right, I suppose. Not terrible, not great, sort of in between. But all of a sudden now I can see, if you aggregate those laps, what the lap that worked really well is. And you can see that in this instance, going to throttle too soon is pushing the car out here. I want it to be there. Whereas going a little bit slower gets the car in the right place to be able to take that corner. So I'm quite happy about that one, to be honest. So there are far worse and offending scenarios that I want to be able to have a look at than that. So this is some of the stuff that I start to look at to be able to say, am I consistent? Because, you could be feeling very proud of the fact that on Friday afternoon in practice, I was cranking out 56s and 57s, and then all of a sudden I've got loads of 53s. I'm like, oh, I'm doing so well. Everything's fantastic. I don't need to look at data. I've got this. And then all of a sudden you happen to find out that inconsistency on the hotter afternoon in the race may result in this losing a position. So as a result, it allows me to be able to have a look. So that's the first sort of area to get in there. There are many of these examples, but there's a few others that I wanted to be able to have a look at. And this is a really nice sort of area of noise that is here. But unfortunately, it doesn't really cost too much in time, because it's a little straight. So straight, then down, and then go again. So not a huge amount of difference in terms of what's going on. But what I did want to be able to have a look at as well is what's happening here. Look at these gains that are here. These laps are much slower in each of these examples. So what's going on there? So let's have a little zoom in and have a look there and be able to see what's going on. So I'm just going to pick this one up here, have a little zoom in here, and see if there's anything that I'm doing that's sort of inconsistent. So I haven't actually zoomed in on this one yet, so chances are Professor Roger is going to give me some schooling on this one, because I haven't zoomed in as much on this one. But at the same time, I think that there is there's a lot of inconsistency that is happening in this particular point on track. But the one big aspect that you'll probably notice more than anything else on this particular area is just having to look at the position on track here.
Exactly where my eye went. There's a reason why. Yep.
Yeah, and there's always a reason why as we have a look at what's going on. So we can see, all sorts of different information that's happening in terms of maybe approach into the corner and the braking for the corner. But we want to be able to have a look into why. And so, again, looking through here, these laps are all leaving this sort of scenario here, and it's either throttle application here, but is throttle application because I've done a better job braking? Probably not. So I would assess that there may be some scenarios here that I want to be able to have a look at in relation to position. But again, anyone who's mentioning fast in, slow out as we start this particular transition of losing time here, just has to look at here, pedal position. Came out of throttle the soonest in the red line. Picked up the brake the soonest, arguably in that particular line. And then even though these are later in terms of application of throttle, this one's on the throttle the soonest coming out of there. So again, another great example that even though it's slightly different, there is a relative inconsistency. But one of the things that the red line is showing is that, in this instance, it's still fast in, slow out. And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier on is that when this happens in qualifying, I sometimes give up, because I say to myself, well, the tires are gone. Yeah, there's no more grip. I've had my hero lap or whatever you get in Toyo RRs, which is oftentimes 0.1 of a second. But I just started to chase the lap time. And by chasing the lap time, I started to really try and drive too much. And so you can start seeing that as you start looking at the consistency in your laps and the driving that are there. The last thing is that there may be elements that you want to throw away. And so there may be a lap to be able to throw away, because this scenario here that we look at is we're in a situation whereby there's one lap that's particularly wide, and the throttle is eased going into that position. That might be that position on the far hand side here, because what we can't see, and this is where, you know, looking at what James Clay was talking about in terms of slope might be useful, because oftentimes some of the aspects of here is that where you're here on the track, anyone who's driven ORP, you're driving up a hill. Not only are you driving up a hill, but you can't see where the hill goes on the other side. And so over here, there's just dirt. That's a dreadful thing to say. There's just, you know, soil, land, trees, rocks, all sorts of stuff that you don't really want to drive into. And so as a result, this may be in a position of being able to look at the scenario whereby this may be a confidence lift, which is, I am absolutely petrified, because now I'm in a position on track where I'm over here and I know what's over here, but the line is wrong, so I need to lift to be able to get the car back to where I want it to be. So loads of examples that exist here in terms of looking at trends in your driving, but one of the things that we always like to be able to look through is we want to be able to look at certain elements of the track. So if I click here, you can see you know, different lines, but doesn't really have material impact in terms of lap time. So, you know, nothing there. You just want to join all these aspects together. And when you do, you can start looking at it. The final thing I wanted to be able to look at as we go through this is looking at some of the brake traces that are here, because it's interesting as we look at the brake analysis, where we see certain things that, you know, that sort of stand out as being you know, good scenarios or bad scenarios, and anywhere where braking is inconsistent is oftentimes you know, a tricky part, because it has such a material knock-on effect to your ability to be able to get the car turned and to be able to get the car out. So even though it doesn't have a material issue in terms of lap time, this area here, I really want to have a look at this if I were going to dig in as to what I'm doing wrong here. And you can just zoom in, say, what am I doing here? And it's just you know, it's just a mess. Whereas you can see that you know, the cleanest line. Now I like zooming in on this one, even though it's not necessarily leading onto the fastest straightaway, because there is arguably time gained and lost here. But the reason I wanted to zoom in on this one finally is that if your braking is inconsistent, it sometimes has a material knock-on, or nearly always has a material knock-on effect on your ability to get on the accelerator. So notice here, coming in, braking well, the threshold braking, there you are, 100% and coming down, lovely. That's what I wanted to be able to see. Stop the car, the platform's flat, as we talked about, yeah, lovely, that's all good. And then the throttle application here, there we go. So all of a sudden I was able to go to 100% throttle. This little bit here is clearly nothing to do with the driver, it's something to do with the car. Chances are it was a, you know, a little lift, but for no, it doesn't look like one that's significant enough to be a reason as to why. Maybe it was just sort of moving foot or bump, or, you know, God knows what was going on there. But at the same time, look at the speed that comes out the corner. It's one of the most consistent that comes out of that particular area there. But at the same time, if we look at these inconsistent braking that is here, look what it has in terms of the ability to go to brake. It was to accelerate. One here was accelerate, then lift again, and then go again. Another one was hesitate, hesitate, and go. And it's because this braking is all over the place that is here. So this would be an area that I'd want to be able to clean up, to be able to look at this. I probably wouldn't necessarily focus in my analysis on this corner, but it's here for illustrative. The reason I wouldn't necessarily analyze it in this corner is because this is a teeny weeny tiny straight. But if it then has a material knock-on effect to our ability to then take it down a straightaway, then I would really want to be able to have a look. And so that's the other aspect. So, you know, these are some of the things that I look at when I look at trends in data. And I think it gives you two things. The first, without a doubt, is it gives you opportunities to be able to improve. And I'm one of those who believes that I could do this driving for a million years. I could get as good as I could ever be, but there would never be a time when I wouldn't want to look at data. And the second thing is I have never, ever in my life ever met a pro driver who doesn't look at data, which is the first thing. The second thing is the more comfortable you get with this model of being able to look here, then here, and here, the beauty of this scenario is that now you can start playing around. And if I had the practice session opened up, I could start looking at what happened as I started to mess around with line, as I started to mess around, because we get it from our little lap timer that tells us the lap time that's there, but the lap timer doesn't tell us, it tells us what's happening in terms of speed, but can you always remember what you did in the car to make that predictive lap timer give you the lap time you need? And I don't know about you, but I'm usually concentrating on trying not to crash. And so I can't remember everything. And so going back to your testing and playing around and looking at your time delta here and seeing what happened is a really good way of being able to identify what has happened overall. So I don't know if we got time for Q&A or whatever, Roger, but that's really what I wanted to have a look at in this session in terms of trends in your driving.
Perfect, perfect. Let me add a couple of things. One of the ones that you talked about in that one area, where there was noise and you may not focus on it. One of the things I noticed you were doing there, it was a heel and toe in that short little braking zone as well, which I think is a great reason to study it, because you've added that additional component. And even though the speed following it was a short little straightaway, boy, if you clean it up there, it's going to clean it up everywhere, right? So I enjoyed that you talked about that particular area. Let's add one more poll here before we get into the final question and answer period. The most popular, I'm going to launch it here first, and then we'll chat about it. When analyzing your data, what functions do you use the most? We've been asking the question in some of these polls that was, hey, what is the most important part that you use as far as the functions in the software? And data analysis was always a big one. And then, so we're going to break that one down a little bit with this poll is when analyzing your data, what functions do you use the most? You know, the measures graph, which is what James has focused a lot on today. And it is kind of the main graph, obviously, so we expect that one to be large. But then beyond that, since you do have multiple choice, split reports, channel reports, the time compare component of the measures graph. What are some of your most important ones that you like to use on? It will help us again focus on when we continue on with these webinars and we start to get into specific functionality. This will be helpful as well. So keep doing those, and I'm going to jump out of the live and jump back into our presentation. And we may jump back into the live depending on where our questions and answers go. Right now, it looks like we don't have any live questions and answers. But while you're answering that, I was glancing over and I seen a message in the chat board from Benjamin, and I wanted to bring it up before we close this out. It was he mentioned something to the effect of, this was the best and most useful webinar so far, and it brought me back to exactly why, at least in my opinion, we're doing them the way we're doing. He talked about having the multiple laps and turning the, all but the fastest ones gray, and then having your one lap and shutting it down and bringing it up. That method that James has perfected and showed you guys to get that color one up on top, so you can really compare and see with multiples of laps. And boy, it is absolutely the reason why we have brought in and will continue to bring in co-hosts that are using this stuff out in the field every day, and to show their little tips and tricks of ways that they use it. We all kind of get hung up in our own little way of doing it. It works for us, and just to see something like that, there was added value for Benjamin and probably some of the rest of you as well. So I appreciate that note, Benjamin, and I know James does as well. So let's go ahead and close out that particular poll. And then let's share it so everybody can kind of get an idea of what the numbers actually were. The measures graph, as expected, I mean, that really is the core of data analysis, looking at those squiggly lines, right? But the number two is a part of that, which is the time compare bar, and then split reports and channel reports. We've already done webinars specifically on split reports and channel reports, and those videos are out there that you can go take a look at. But down a little bit farther, I noticed the question in the question and answer earlier was, hey, can we look at the outer edges of those lines in the GPS map in RayStudio 2? How do I know where I'm falling on the track, right? RayStudio 3, we actually showed a little bit of a sneak preview of RayStudio 3 analysis. It will have imagery in the background, but right now with the Google Earth KML export function that you're looking at here, that 8% of the folks talked about was important to them. That's one way you can bring your data out and check it out and how it falls in the line. So I appreciate appreciate all of that. Looks like we've kind of got our questions and answers under control. I'm going to stop sharing that just to get it out of everybody's way, and then we'll maybe do I think we covered it with those results. Let's kind of any questions and answers you saw go by, James, that you did not have a chance to hit on before we leave this particular panel.
To be honest, I was busy presenting and didn't look at the questions as much as I should have.
That's fine. That's fine. No big deal. We've got them covered, or they've been answered. Again, remember that this is being recorded. We're going to place it out on YouTube, and the questions and answers, if they went back past you too quickly and you were listening to James like James was focused on his stuff, those questions and answers will be provided in a day or two in the description, a link to that in the description on the YouTube video when it gets up in the next hour or so. The questions and answers always follows a little bit behind because we have to compile them. So the next thing, as we kind of close this one out, training and support. We love doing these webinars, and we're going to continue to do those. But we always, of course, have the YouTube site where you can go and watch these back. We specifically go fairly quick, jumping through the data as fast as we can. We want to get the information as much as we can in the hour, and even if it's a little bit too fast for you to grab and really soak in when you're first looking at it, putting them out there where you can go back and review that data later is important to us. You can watch that. In your email that you got, 1 hour reminder email, you've got the data that James just used. You've got the user profiles. We built one of those profiles after we created that, but that will get you started, and then you can build one like James did. And the data and the presentation, those 3 files were linked in that email. They will be linked in the YouTube video as well when you go and review it later. So you can recreate everything you just saw. Customer support, I always say it, we're a customer support company that happens to sell electronics, and we are so looking forward to getting back out to the track and working with you guys in person. But you'll always have available the 800 number and the YouTube site and some of the other things. So make sure you give us a holler if you're having any questions or any problems with anything. We love to hear from you. Next webinar, we have heard you, and we've had lots of polls leading up to now, and we've shifted some things around. So this coming Thursday, in just a couple of days, Thursday, May 7th, same time, same 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to do a webinar on track maps in the aim sports universe. It is a confusing subject, and we're going to try to tie it all together and give you guys an idea of, okay, we say track maps. What does that mean? How are they all interrelated? When do you use one? When do you use the other? We'll try to make that as clear as we can, and doing a 1 hour session on these track maps. So looking forward to that in just a couple of days. So make sure you come back on Thursday, May 7th, and we'll talk about that and have lots of questions and answers there as well. So with that, we'll close this one out. James, you have anything else to add as we're finishing up?
No, not at all. I mean, I just wanted to say thank you for having me. I think that I've made a few videos that many people can access. If you go to my website, jamescolborn.com, you'll find a section that's dedicated to the videos. A lot of them are similar to AIM, so I obviously use the official ones, but maybe just a different point of view from me in terms of my thoughts in terms of video. And if you do look at the videos, I would just like to apologize to anyone who watches the first few of those where I'm not quite sure how YouTube works. I'm a bit robotic, and there's a cooling fan of the computer in the background, which sounds like we've got a hairdryer on. So, first ones are quite good, but at the same time, bear with us. But yeah, I'm always happy to look at different videos. So if you want anything that you think should be prepared as a video, just let me know. But I think most of it's going to be covered by this fantastic series. So I just want to say to AIM folks, thanks so much for having me.
And thank you, James, for not only your contribution today to what we've done here. I know it's a lot of work putting this together, where you lead the main discussion, but your contribution over the years has been wonderful. Everybody, please go visit James's YouTube site and his website, and there are lots of very interesting and very cool ways that he does things with his AIM data and ways to get faster that maybe are a little bit different than what you've thought about it. It's always great to have good ideas. thanks to all of our guys from AIM that were answering the questions. They killed it today. Kept ahead of it fairly well. So I appreciate all of their efforts as well. Again, looking forward to we'll call this one a day. Looking forward to Thursday with track maps, and we'll see you all there.